Hello, everybody. Thank you a lot for joining us today. And hello again to those who participate in the previous session. So we are here from Festival d'Aix in France. I'm Léa Donnecker. I work for the Mediterranean Youth Orchestra team, Orchestre des Jeunes de la Méditerranée in France. So this webinar is part of the session 4 of Medinea On Air. And this webinar will be available in replay on Medinea platform and on YouTube. Today, Ophélie Mercier is with us. So hello, Ophélie, and she will talk about interculturality in the performing arts. And we want this presentation to be interactive, so feel free to talk about your experience. So Ophélie, I let you introduce yourself. And
yeah, hello. Thank you very much, Léa, and the whole Medinea team for inviting me today for this presentation. So I will also, a bit similar to Martin earlier, introduce myself and be speaking today about interculturality and performing arts with different hats. The first one I will be talking about is a project that we recently finished with a team of circus practitioners, people who work as circus trainers, and a project that was called Circus as Intercultural Encounter. And I coordinated this project with the Caravan network. So I will tell you more about this in a minute. And the second hat with which I will be speaking is as a researcher. I'm currently doing a research on the career and life trajectories of artists from Egypt who are now based in Europe. And so this will be also talking about artist identities and circulations and how all these kind of come at play when artists live in a different context. So maybe I will start with sharing my presentation. Yeah, you can see it. Yes, perfect. So, okay, I need to. Yes, perfect. So this is a bit the structure of my presentation. So I will first show you the 4 questions that I think we can look at all together. I think a lot of the work I've been doing, either through the research project or my own research project, is really to give voice or to think together with people that are themselves concerned with those questions of identities and circulations and artists. So I think probably all of you have different sorts of experiences with these questions. And I think it will be much more interesting to interact, and that you all have a lot of really interesting inputs to think about these questions. So I will, maybe we will put in the chat the link to a slide, to a, it's called a Jamboard, where you can see those 4 different questions. So the first one is, what does it mean to be Mediterranean musician? Do you see yourself as one, and how does it reflect in your music practice? The second one is, what are the benefits of portraying oneself as a Mediterranean artist? The third one, which cliches about your identity do you accept for your music career, and what are the ones you try to avoid? And finally, it will be more sort of to conclude all together how we can play around with these different labels and make sentences, and how we also use these, all of us, in different settings for applications, for example, or to portray ourselves in certain contexts. So you can play around with this already. You can go on the, I'm sorry, my arrow is not going to the right spot. It's not the arrow, it's the little thing below that you need to click, the little post-it that you will see. There's like a little box that appear, and you can write here things that come to your mind, things that you think make sense to your own experiences. So you can do that all along my presentations, and then we will go back to that at the end, and then we can sort of interact and use it as a base to discuss together. So yeah, this will be the sort of the first sort of general questions that we will look at, and then now I will go a bit more into these two projects. This project called Circus as Intercultural Encounters, and I will tell you a bit more how we've been dealing with those words in the project, and how maybe they have echo in your own work and in this Medinea project. And then in a second part, I will look at the experiences of Egyptian artists, give you some little inputs from the experiences of the artists I've met, and to think about artistic identities and artist identities, and how sort of these are entangled, what the actual practice and your own identities separately or interlinked. So first, the context of this project, Circus as Intercultural Encounter. So it was a project that was started in, or that the reflection started at least in the post-2015 context. So with a lot of migration arriving in Europe, and as a consequence of that, a lot of public policy were established to respond to these people arriving on the European continent. And one of those public policy response was a lot of funding opportunities for arts and culture. And there was specifically a lot of projects that emerged for arts and culture organization to organize workshops and projects with migrants and refugees. And within the circus community at the time, there was a lot of reflections of thinking, but what does it mean actually to offer circus workshops to people in this situation? And also then how do we do that? Sorry, I'm just, and also thinking, if we implement this kind of project, what this notion of interculturality means. What in the context we were working with, it was non-professional circus practice, and we thought it would be interesting to dig a bit further and think what is at stake in this intercultural moment. What happens? Is it just sort of magic? We all get together and it happens like this, or are there still some power dynamics? I mean, people come in with who they are and how this encounter actually takes place. And also in a certain way, how identities are playing an important role, and how then there's a sort of intersection between what identities, the role of identities and the artistic practice. And so for this, we created a project where we were doing research in different circus organizations. And we had this idea to do it like practice-led research, research-led practice. So it was very much, the whole research was very much using the expertise and the experiences of the circus practitioners. So that's where also it was interesting, because a lot of our methodology was about how, as artists and as arts practitioners, we observe, we see certain dynamics within our own groups, and how can this help to produce knowledge. And in research, there is also a lot of reflections going on positionality. So it's the idea of thinking, where do I position myself in relation to the group? So in the research context is, how do I position myself in relation mostly to the people I'm studying? But we thought this was also very useful in this reflection, in this thinking, researching interculturality. How do I position myself with the group I'm working with the other people I'm encountering or meeting? Who's coming from where? And the idea of who is coming from where, it's not just about coming from where geographically, but from what social background, from what educational background, from what physical or musical ability. I'm not an expert of the musical context, but I can imagine that depending on what types of music education, you come to an intercultural encounter with a specific baggage that you can use, and you can talk about your own music practice in different ways. So we thought this was interesting to think when thinking about the interculturality, that we all come from a specific position to meet the others. And this specific position will have a lot of impact on how we meet. So to think about interculturality, sorry, did I jump? Yeah, here we go. So we used the definition initially of the Council of Europe that defines intercultural dialogue as an idea that aims to develop a deep understanding of the diversity of worldviews and ways of doing things in order to increase cooperation and participation or freedom of choice, to enable personal development and transformation, and to promote tolerance and respect for the other. And what we thought was interesting to maybe go a bit further than this definition was to think of interculturality, sorry, there's a little spelling mistake, as a reflexive and power-sensitive concept. So to think about it, that it helps you to question yourself also in this encounter. It's not, again, not just a given, but it's to reflect, to think, how does it happen? And to think that also it's power sensitive in the sense that it is connected to power dynamics. There are people that for certain reasons have more power than others, within a group, these power dynamics can move in a certain context, maybe within a sort of a music intercultural exchange. Maybe some people have more power when in the rehearsal, and some others will have more in the performance time because they're more comfortable. So then all of this will impact the meeting altogether. And this is obviously not fixed dynamics. It's very moving, and it's in constant negotiation. So it's this idea also. What was very strong in this project is that we came up with this idea that it wasn't a goal to work towards interculturality or to have an intercultural project. We were not aiming for it, but rather it's something that was constantly in negotiation, that we were constantly trying to think, how do we include each other? How do we think of everyone's position and make sure that we're as much as possible in connections, but also highlighting that differences don't disappear, and that it's also important to sort of give space for these differences. There may be differences of opinions, but also play out in many different ways. And so, like authors or intellectuals that wrote about intercultural encounters, or at least the moment of the encounter that we thought about, is to again think about it as like where we're coming from in this moment where we encounter. So we used, like, for example, the work of Helen Wilson, who used this expression, ethics of attunement. So I imagine this is maybe a metaphor that can speak to you as a practice that includes failure, inappropriateness, ambiguity, ambivalence, rupture, and transience. So it's really this idea that that's something we're thriving for, but we're somehow, as much as we're trying to make it work, it's also filled with failure and being inappropriate and being ambiguous, but it's all the sort of dynamic that can be thought about to make this happen. And also I like very much a metaphor that is used by Edouard Glissant as well, this idea of the encounter as an archipelago, is this idea that he tries to say, let's not make a big difference between the island and the continent or the lands, but to sort of see how we really navigate between places and between language, and that it's sort of very dynamic conception of the identity that only exists in contact with differences that are constantly being reshaped depending on on where you kind of go to. So that's sort of like how we have been dealing with those ideas in this project. And I'm happy to maybe answer questions if you have more questions after. And I think what maybe to like summarize it in one sort of summary idea that can connect also to your project, I think it's to really think of where we are coming from when we encounter, and sort of and that this does not necessarily create a sort of opening moment, but it can create also tension, and how do we engage with these tensions, and how we sort of grow and really sort of move forward with these differences. And to think of interculturality as how the differences can create in a way the commonality. And so in the second project that I wanted to tell you more about is this research project that I'm conducting at the moment, in which I'm trying to look at how Egyptian artists who are based in Europe are pursuing their artistic career in their new context of residence, and what are the difficulties and opportunities that they encounter in this process. Again, if you're interested in the Q&A, I can sort of go more into details, but I think what has been very interesting in meeting artists, mostly I've been meeting artists who have recently arrived in Europe, and but who were involved in some international cooperation project between across the Mediterranean, also like different projects that sometimes we're using this label, but we're also very much involved in sort of in international cooperation and artistic projects. And some of the elements or ideas that came up, I mean, there was a first sort of discussion about this idea of artist biographies. So how do artists actually write their biographies? I was quite fascinated by the different websites where the artists that I was meeting for the research, depending on the website, were highlighting different things in their biographies. And what I was specifically interested in was how some were using the fact that they were Egyptian, saying like, blah, 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 Egyptian artist who does da, da, da. Some were not putting it at all. Some were saying born in Cairo, and now living in Berlin, for example. So I tried to ask them how they were dealing with this question of the what we call the Egyptianness in a way, and how they were using it in different contexts, and who was writing these biographies. And an interesting element that came from an artist to whom it was really the sort of second word, like I was saying her name is an Egyptian artist, and I was asking her, like, why did you choose to make this an important, like something that apparently is important because it comes as the second word on your biography? And she explained that she thought there was a lot of preconceived ideas on what it is to be an Egyptian artist, and that she had a lot of debate with herself whether to put it, whether to take it off, so that people would not project what they think being an Egyptian artist would be about. But in the end, she decided to put it anyway, because she thought that she wanted to define herself what she meant by it. So there was sort of, that was her own negotiation of how to deal with her nationality in this biography. Some other elements that came up is this idea of ticking boxes. So what a few artists that I've met have explained is that they feel like when they write, especially like applications or when they present their work, they need to present it in a certain framework that highlight a specific elements of their identities. for example, gender when you're a woman, or being an Arab artist, or being a migrant artist, or being from this country or this country. And what also came up a lot is the idea that certain artists need to highlight those dimensions, to tick those boxes much more than others. And so they were trying to like also see how they navigate this expectation to tick certain boxes. So one of the artists that I met said that his way to how to say to like his strategy in a way to sort of avoid being put in certain boxes, or being or sort of showing his own narrative towards what he wanted to say and what he wanted to express artistically, was to tell the story in their own words. And that's the photo that you see on the slide, and this performance called Self-Entitlement, that is a clear sort of expression of telling their story from with their own words, as in their own narrative, but also their own artistic devices. And the national framework I explained a bit with the biographies. So this is like some hints of, or like possible ideas of reflections on this, on how sort of artists, or how the artist identities sort of are entangled with the artistic identities, and how there is some sort of expectations for from certain artists to present certain kinds of work. So I think it would be interesting to have discussions all together, to think like how maybe this is experiences you've had, or yeah, like how you think of this idea of the Mediterranean identity, and if it resonates with some of these elements that I've mentioned, although I did not speak so much about the Mediterranean identity as a thing per se, but I've sort of touched around dynamics that take place around the Mediterranean. So I will maybe stop sharing. Let's stop sharing now. Yeah. And I will maybe instead share this. Yep. Sorry. Yep. So I think maybe we can. I mean, maybe I will see if you have questions, or if you need clarifications on what I have presented. Maybe that's a bit more helpful, and then we can slowly slide with the questions on the other slide, on the link.
Thank you, Ophélie. If you want to put your question on chat box, feel free. We can just wait a few minutes if you want to ask question, or to write something on the whiteboard.
So maybe we can, I mean, you didn't put anything to the first question, but maybe we can still start with it, about this idea of being a Mediterranean artist. Like we saw before with the previous presentation, I don't know, maybe some of you were there, like how this Mediterranean label has been used, especially in festivals recently, or like used differently as a Mediterranean music festival or festival of Mediterranean identities. And so I was wondering if this is something that you as artists, as musicians, also use. Is it something that you would present yourself as such, or is it something that is then at stake more at the at organizational levels? So is it maybe you can, I don't know, interact here. I think that's what would be the nicest way to sort of have that conversation together.
Ophélie, when I look at the people participating in the conversation, I think we are many cultural operators.
Okay.
More than musicians for participation.
Yeah. So then.
Oh, and there is Maud who attended many webinars, and she's a singer. Hi, Maud.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
I don't really have questions, but since you asked and wanted to know how we feel, I don't know. It's a hard question for me because I was born in Montpellier. And I lived my adulthood in Marseille. So yes, I'm Mediterranean. I am, but my parents were from the Alps, you know, so they are way less. But I very much feel like a Mediterranean person, because I grew where I grew up, you know. But somehow there is something in me that feels like I'm not entitled to this title.
Why not?
I don't know. Because my music doesn't include makams, maybe, I don't know. Because I'm too quiet, who knows? You know, there is this presumption that I'm too French to be Mediterranean. I don't know, it's just thinking.
Yeah, and I think it's really relevant. I think it's maybe that's not a label that then applies to all sides of the Mediterranean. I think that's what is maybe interesting. Is that for some other people it would be something to connect maybe to other shores of the Mediterranean, but in your case it's not.
I don't know. Yeah. Question I cannot really answer, in fact.
No, but I think that was a very interesting answer.
Part of me really connects with that term, because I don't see myself living elsewhere than in Marseille, at least in France. I don't think I would like to live in the north of France or even somewhere else than Marseille, you know, because it's really particular. I choose that city.
Yeah.
I was very angry with it for a while, and now I feel a bit more at peace. And yeah, so some part of me is deeply connected to this south of like Marseille and this particular culture there. And I feel more connected to someone from Spain, Italy, even Morocco than the Netherlands, as someone was saying earlier. You know.
Maud, sorry, I have just one question. Tell you more about your music, because you do you think your music? Do you feel a Mediterranean artist because you tell about your person, but as an artist?
Well, that's also a difficult question. I don't know. I have so many interests. I sing in French, in Portuguese, in English, sometimes in Spanish. I play jazz, but I like fusion jazz. I like to mix it with Latin, Brazilian influences. So that's not very Mediterranean, but in the meantime, that's also what happens with globalization, you know?
Mm.
And so no, I don't do Mediterranean music so as to speak like what the festival of Lisbon in Arles would intend, you know?
Mm.
I would never apply for that label, but that would be also nice to think a bit like with the context of globalization, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think what I feel is that, like for instance, a lot of cultural operators and festivals mostly, they have their brand, you know, and they have their branding systems for artists. And when we talk about Mediterranean, we will, I don't know, a bit fall into the cliches. And I was really glad to hear the presentation of the earlier presentation. I don't recall his name, the musicologist.
Martin Guerpin.
Yeah, he presented like old music, very different, like very similar, but also from different parts. And yeah, maybe it would be interesting to go into that direction. At least it gave me some hints. Oh yeah, I could dig into that.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So I'm sorry I cannot answer your question.
No, but you're absolutely answering it. I think it's exactly what is interesting, is to see where it applies maybe and where it doesn't. And I think I mean, like what it means. Does it mean leaving by the Mediterranean coasts, which is the side of what you shared? How does that make sense or not within a certain practice? But I was going to ask you how do you present, because the way you presented us your music was very complex. And so I was wondering, how do you actually then present it when it has to be, I imagine you're not writing this when you're writing about it to present what you do. So what are the words that you choose?
I usually present it as a crossover,
Mm-hmm.
jazz, vocal jazz music,
Mm-hmm.
with influenced by French chanson, Brazilian rhythms, jazz idioms.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Are there people who would like to contribute? Maybe then we can sort of think of the second question that few of you have responded. What are the benefits of portraying oneself as a Mediterranean artist, evoking a capacity of improvising, composing? So cultural and artistic richness and diversity, and meritorious artists. So I understand from this that then the idea of the Mediterranean label to artists sort of implies this capacity or this sense of merging, or of maybe what I was saying a bit earlier, like of hearing the differences and sort of handling them. And I think it's interesting, this idea also of the capacity, that it would be a skill to hear and to observe and to listen, and to sort of take it in and then produce something else. I am not exactly sure with this idea of meritorious artist. I don't know exactly what that's evoking. So I don't know if the person who said that wants to tell us a bit more, or if if not, then we can look at the third question. So which cliches about your identity do you accept for your music career, and what are the ones you try to avoid? Flexibility versus nonchalance, problem of equality in the professional and artistic relations between the different regions of the Mediterranean, and difficulties to circulate with the visas. Yeah. Does anyone want to sort of expand a bit on this point, or share about, I don't know, their experience? Project we used, maybe I can put you the link after in the chat. We use this theory. I'm not remembering the name of the researcher who worked on this, and we used an image that's like looks like a 3D image, and when you first show it, people can see very different things. You can see a bit of like a gold, I don't know, square thing, or a stage. You know, you can see a room, and it's a very nice, interesting example to see how within a group, whoever the people in the group, they will see different things, and how along the exercise, then you can all see the same things, but how you need to sort of do something in your mind of stepping in and out to be able to have these different perspectives on that same drawing. And I think it's a nice illustration that you gave. Does someone else wants to share? I think, I mean, we don't need to go through the last one, but it was just a suggestion to think of things also, how then based on those cliches or those labels, also they're not also to say that they're only imposed by I don't know, the cultural public policy, for example, or organizations, but then also there's a whole sort of dynamic dimension of also how artists present themselves with certain labels, and then how this enables to access maybe certain opportunities, but they also become as well part of who the people are and how they think of their work and maybe of themselves. So I think I would stop here unless you have more questions.
More question? I just repeat, but
I think Basma wants to.
Yeah. Okay, Basma.
It's not really a question. It's about labels and things one can try to promote and one can try to avoid. Working on communication for a Mediterranean network is not easy, because it's playing with labels and being aware that labels can be sometimes good, sometimes bad, for especially when we are working with the emerging artists. There's that way of thinking that they are starting something new, something that they are going to do all their life, and to label them as Mediterranean can say something about them, about their work for a long time. And since we are more cultural workers here than the musicians, I wanted to share that it's important to think about how we communicate about interculturality, because it can be good to have, I don't know, fundings, but it's really a political, I don't know, statement. So sorry, it was not a question.
No, but it's super interesting, exactly. And I think it says like also that the whole tension, like sometimes also in the research I'm doing, I'm listening a lot to the artists, and then you know, for like artists that show their work, I don't know, in whatever, like Arab Film Festival, for example, then, you know, they will be very critical to this, but then I will listen to the cultural workers and they will say, yeah, but then anyway, those films will not be seen in the other cinemas. So let's just at least see them, show them in this film festival. So, I mean, if the alternative is not to show their films anymore, but then it's a really complicated discussion. And I think that's also what came up also with our project, is not to say that it's an easy way and that those are the words you should use and those are the words you shouldn't use. But I think it's just thinking of the dynamics and where the words are coming from and how they've been used, and how also eventually they become used and then they become reappropriated by maybe the EU funding structures, and then they're maybe a bit dispossessed from what they meant originally, and those words travel. I mean, for a long time, things was about, I think this Mediterranean thing has also emerged, like we said earlier, in the last few years, with political projects that link to it, with the EU funding that suddenly expanded to also other sides of the Mediterranean. So those are definitely moving and dynamic things. And I think that's what's interesting about questioning it and researching it, is that maybe you widen a bit a sort of way to use them or nuance them a little bit. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we can conclude on these words. Thank you very much, Ophélie, for this very interesting presentation and to and questioning us. I think this question of Mediterranean identity and interculturality is interesting for artists, but also for us, cultural institution. And thank you, all of you, for your time and to participate to this webinar. I just close this webinar and say thank you very much and see you soon.
Thank you.